Introduction. Hello and welcome to Career Ready from a Distance. Today we're going to talk about strategies and ideas for supporting CTE students as they learn from home in a career readiness side of things. We have a slew of people in here. If you're joining us, please feel free to join the chat. And if you'd like to join the slides, I went ahead and dropped the slides in the chat. You can also access the slides from our CTE Distance site where I posted them in the webinar section. And I will also post this recording at the end. Hopefully I'll get that up in the next 24 hours so that you can access this and any resources associated with it as you go forward. So thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Jewel Clark. I'm the Integrated Curriculum Coordinator at the County Office of Education in San Diego, and I support career readiness initiatives throughout our region, much of which is CTE or career technical education. But anyone who is looking to do innovative and career ready practice from kindergarten through college, I'm excited to be part of many of those programs and initiatives and support you wherever I can. So thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the slides here. And I wanted to start out by just talking about this bigger picture of distance learning, and the California Department of Education has issued this diagram here that might kind of help as we envision what it looks like now and also what it may look like in the fall. And so we a lot of times are looking at how we can work through online platforms with our students. We may have some things that are synchronous where we're working together at the same time, like those of you who are in here now, also asynchronous. So anyone who's watching this later, right? You don't have to be here in order to learn at the same moment. And so that's something that is really helpful for students, particularly when there are so many difficulties with making sure we're online all at the same time, and there's a computer and internet and all of those things. So the more that we can do to ensure students can access information at any time, the better. As we get into the fall, we may also see a variety of models that might include things like having computer labs or classrooms that are open for temporary times so that they're social distancing. We may be back in regular school. It really just depends on the situation. A lot of people are having to send home paper packets of instructional materials, particularly in rural areas. We see that significantly. And then this idea of what can we do in person with social distancing guidelines. So right now, everyone is kind of in these spaces of like the top two and maybe these paper packets, but also thinking about as we transition to the fall, some distance learning may cycle through depending on what we have going on and where we're going with COVID-19 and all of that. So it's really helpful right now to just be very kind of thoughtful about what this looks like and how best to serve our students. So as we jump into it, I think it's important before you get started in planning to think about the scope of learning. If you joined me for my webinar last week, there's a couple of overlapping slides, but we'll be doing a lot of different content as well. And I'll have the link to that webinar in here that I did last week on lesson planning for distance learning and CTE. But I think either way, we really want to think about, before we get into it, what is asked of us and students. So we have kind of a balance between required instruction and enrichment now. Most of our schools are in a no hold harmless, right? So our students aren't getting penalized if they're not doing anything. So you may have like those A+ students who will do the work no matter what, and those DNF students who are like, please, I just need a passing grade. And then you kind of lost some of those middle students along the way. So, you know, it's hard to kind of think about that purpose now, but also then thinking to the fall, when that is more required, like what will this look like? Also then thinking about your assets that your students have, the hardware and software you've sent them home with. Unfortunately in CTE, a lot of times we need a higher level computer in order to accomplish the goals that we have for our students. So there may be additional difficulties in this space because of the hardware and software. But sometimes spending time in the career readiness components of the work actually are beneficial and can be done even when students have just a Chromebook, or even on paper packets, or if all they have is a phone. So I have some resources that will be helpful in that case that I'll show you in a little bit. And I also just really want you to think about you and your capacity and what you can do to provide these opportunities. You know, if you think about if last time you got to fly somewhere, which probably hasn't been for at least 2 months, they announce at the beginning that you put your mask on before you put the mask on of others. And I think right now a lot of us are feeling so overwhelmed, and what can we do, and what can we do for our students and for our site and for our teachers and for our colleagues and for our families. But you do also have to remember that it's okay that you have needs and boundaries and things like that. So make sure that you think about your own capacity. Care for yourself, take a moment when you need it, and then you'll be a better off in helping others as well. So I just want you to think about your own capacity and where you are, and that's okay if you're new. I did blended learning when I was in the classroom. I had a flipped classroom, so this is all things that for me aren't brand new, but for most teachers, you haven't had an online presence before. So it's okay if you don't look magical like what everyone else is posting, because people only post what's amazing, right? So most teachers are in a real capacity building time right now, and that's okay. So give yourself a break as you go through this, because it's not just the scope of what your students are expected, but also what you can do. So not only are we thinking about the scope of learning, but right now we are uniquely placed to really focus on the value of learning. And in career technical education, we historically have had learning that has the most value of all, because we're focused on things that affect their future, that are meaningful to our communities, are meaningful to industry, real world problem solving and skill building. We have this unique engagement with students because career technical education has meaning that's very specific beyond the bounds of our classroom wall. And so when we think about right now where most grades are kind of not important, we need to give our students opportunities that have a bigger value than a grade. And so as you look to plan your course, and think about this, what is that value beyond the grade, and how does that impact a student's engagement in the class? So, really think about that value, and how you're able to impact that student. Because if it's just for a grade, if it's just busy work, I wouldn't do it. Would you do it? Probably not. So really thinking and being thoughtful about the value of learning is more important. Along these lines, if you've ever had just kind of a brainstorm idea and you're like, I don't know how I would grade this, but wouldn't it be fun if we did X, Y, or Z? Now's the time to do it, because grades don't really matter. Try something new, try something wacky. You can even tell your students, like, I'm going to try something that I always wanted to try, but I was worried about how I would grade it. And they are going to be super excited, along with you, about what they're learning, because it's something new and different and has a bigger value. So that's kind of the foundation. As we get into the meat of this webinar, what I want to focus on is kind of like 3 overarching pieces. And the theme for this is really not specific to building your lesson plans. There's a couple of slides on that, but there's a whole webinar on that I've already done. And you can access that. That link will be later. But really today, I just want you to think about how you can add the lens of career readiness to the courses that you're building, and how students might find a value in that along the way. So we're going to talk about the career exploration and pathway planning, portfolios, essential skills, resume building, things like that. A little bit about building your course and strategies, and how some of these things can become routines that you embed. And then the bigger picture of projects and how projects can really give value to a course and give career ready strategies, and build those skills along the way. So as we go through, also thinking about the standards for career ready practice. All CTE anchor standards are aligned to the standards for career ready practice. And if you're a core academic teacher who's teaching a CTE aligned course, these are also really helpful. Let's just go ahead and jump over and click on them. And when I was in the classroom, I taught medical chemistry. And so although I was hitting all of the state standards for chemistry, I also really focused on the standards for career ready practice. And this is a really great focus area as you think about distance learning. Obviously, technical skills and academic knowledge, that's what we do all the time. But how are we digging deeper into all of these additional components along the way? And you probably already do a lot of these, but are you assigning them? Are you evaluating them? Are you giving students the opportunity to explore them? And apologies if you can hear some emergency vehicles in the background. We're all working from home, and we get what we got. So sorry about that. All right, so we're gonna get into these components as we go. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. There's like a little hand raise function in the participants box at the bottom, and I'll be happy to answer as we go. All right, so the first thing I wanted to talk about is career exploration. So just here's a couple of things that you could ask of your students. First, priority sector profile. When we talk about priority sectors, that's usually in your region what the high wage, high growth industries are. So in San Diego, we have really specific priority sectors. They're outlined by our Center of Excellence, which is our community college partners, and the San Diego Workforce Partnership, which is our workforce investment board here in San Diego. So these two resources down at the bottom are a great place to look at things around like healthcare and biotechnology and information communication technology, advanced manufacturing, a number of our priority sectors here in San Diego. You can have students create this little mini profile for each one of those sectors, or for the sector that aligns with whatever course that you're teaching. The other thing you could do is have students create a career spotlight. Have them pick one single career and do a deep dive. Have them go through and create educational requirements, entry-level positions, wage information, all of these things. Now, this particular sector, I actually created this career exploration bingo. So this went out last week, but you're welcome to use this. I recommend that you make a copy of this, and that way you can change anything or share it with your students, and they can fill it out themselves and things like that. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see what I'm seeing here. So basically, there are activities for each letter, and I'll make this a little bit smaller actually so you can see the whole bingo card. So what I recommend is that you ask students to do one from each letter. So under B, they might have to pick one of these 5. Under I, they need to pick one of these 5. And so then if you go to any of these particular categories, they're bookmarked down here. There's actually, they can pick one of the 5 things. If you see this asterisk next to it, that means that you could print these and go forward from there. And so, you know, this gives students a little bit of choice. It's like, okay, pick one of these 5 things. You don't need to pick all of them. And that gives them an opportunity. So then they just fill out this and they pick one B activity, one I activity, one G, one O. And for O, they actually do that priority sector kind of profile, but they get to pick the sector. So it could be based on your sector or something of that nature. There's prompts for each of these. So this is a great way to just give your students this overarching piece, the not so free space in the middle, talking about post-secondary options and return on investment. So just kind of taking advantage of that bingo concept. So this is a really fun thing. And I think Diane mentioned in the group chat here how choice boards are a good motivation for students. And I agree. So this is kind of like that idea of a choice board. You know, they have a choice from each category. And what you can do is say like, all right, you're going to do 2 or 3 weeks of this, and you could pick one this week and you'll pick a different one next week. So this could actually extend beyond the current work that you're doing. So there's a few resources here, and in that Career Ready Bingo, there's tons of resources. So you could just cut and paste individual activities and use those. It doesn't actually have to be, you know, like if you don't want to do the whole career exploration bingo, you could actually look through and go like, oh, here's an assignment. You could just steal that assignment that I made up about this idea where they watch a little video on business attire, and then they have to search the house and try out 3 work-ready looks at different levels, right? So this could just be a single activity that you assign. Feel free to pull from this whatever you want. This is licensed under Creative Commons, so you're welcome to use, reuse, and whatever you need for it. All right. When we get into this, after they explore careers, it's really helpful for students to then think about the plan for careers. So thinking about not just a single career pathway, but add some branches in there. If you are thinking about a particular career or a particular field, have students look at what their different post-secondary paths might be as far as options. Right now, we're in this unique time where I think a lot of people are predicting that students may go to community college first, because we're not really sure if you are paying to go to a four-year university and you're not on campus, what does that look like? And so we actually may see more students divert into our community college system than normal, just because the uncertainty of the times. Then you can live at home and you're not having to live in a communal dorm environment and things like that. So it's really a good time for students to think about their different paths to get to any given career, what that would look like. I think a lot of students don't know that there are academic programs that are built to direct transfer to the four-year university, depending on what program you're completing. And so those are great places for students to explore right now. While they're at home, and you may not be able to, take them into the auto shop or do, the level of CAD design and CNC work that you normally would do in the classroom. So have students kind of build out a career pathway plan along the way. I think another area that is really interesting when we're talking about distance learning is portfolio development. If you give students an activity or assignment or a project opportunity that can live on a portfolio, now we're talking about value that lives beyond their moment in the classroom right now. And so as we think about a portfolio, this is what represents our students beyond where they are right now in high school. CTE students have unique opportunities that most students don't have in high school, that are real world ways that they can say that they have experience in a certain career field. But one day when they do go to an interview, it's very hard sometimes to articulate what work they've done in high school and how that pertains to the job that they're looking for. And so having students look at portfolios and curate what they like in portfolios, and then work on portfolio pieces for themselves, is a really great way for them to start having, something to back up the fact that, yes, I was a high schooler, but I did real world activities. I did all of these things, and they set me up to uniquely be employed by this employer, right? So how do you help students build their portfolio, which will either get them a job or perhaps a scholarship or get into college or whatever that is. Give students opportunities to evaluate each other's portfolios, get feedback. And then also we'll talk about the essential skills here in a moment, but you can actually just say like, all right, there's 6 essential skills of the world of work. So let's have you do one portfolio piece that represents each one of those. And so these are all potential opportunities for you to make distance learning assignments that are really focused on building these skills, building their presence as a professional, and being able to show their growth and their skills for future needs. So that brings us to this idea of skills, right? Essential skills, resume building. We actually have some resume workshops on our website. So if you go to that CTE Distance Learning, and we'll go look at that in a little bit, you'll see a whole bunch of our resume workshops and essential skill building workshops that are archived already in our webinar section. We actually just released this new list of essential skills in partnership with the San Diego Workforce Partnership. And so in the past, there was like a list of 24 skills, and we'd categorize them in one way, and now they're categorized in a new way to reflect current practice in industry. We're also in a project, so by this fall, we'll also be releasing a set of rubrics aligned to these new skills. In the meantime, there are resources on our website that align to the previous ones that are listed here. But you can also, and if you're accessing this slides, you can click all of these, and I'll put the slides in as well. But San Diego Workforce Partnership, we've worked together, and here are the descriptors of each one of these. And I created these essential skill building challenges for each grade level that you could consider during distance learning. And so whether you are in the early years, there's some activities here, or in high school, really thinking about the essential skills and how they live in distance learning and currently asking your students to work from home is the same as asking a professional to work from home. So having students work through and come up with some parallels between working from home and learning from home is a great way for them to really be thoughtful about the skills, because they are developing a skill set that many of us don't have. And so these are some great tips on developing essential skills right now, and some information on those essential skills that we just released 2 weeks ago from Workforce Partnership. All right, any questions? We kind of are through the first little segment of this. Feel free to throw questions in the chat, raise your hand, or whatever works to find out if you have any. All right, I'm going to keep going. It doesn't look like I've got any coming. So let's talk just briefly about building your course. So when I talk about building a course, I really think about it like a learning playlist. I'm listening to music all the time. I like to shuffle sometimes. Sometimes I like want to skip this one because I'm just not interested in it right now. And maybe I'll just look up something that I want to do or listen to on my own, right? So how do we take that idea of curating our own music, our own media, whatever it is, and apply that to distance learning for students? So the first thing we want to do is think about our learning outcomes, right? What are the priorities? Right now, we're not going to get to all of our normal learning outcomes for this school year. And so really thinking about what would make the biggest impact if this is the last time that they're in your class, or as a preparation for whatever class that they're going into with you in the fall, right? Or into your pathway. So think about some of those maybe non-negotiable learning outcomes that you didn't get to before March 13th, and have those be the focus for the remainder of the school year. The other area of focus is SEL. How are you checking in with students? How are you building their community? CTE has always provided a strong community for our students. And so as we think about SEL and how we engage with our students, it's really important to make sure that, that's kind of number one. It also increases engagement. When you have things like, bring your pet to work or to school day, or, the chair design challenge or crazy hair, students will get in just to see each other, and then you can sneak the learning in with it. And it also just gives them a sense of belonging and connection when right now a lot of people feel very isolated. There's not much in their control. And so giving our students that opportunity to connect is very healthy for them. Then think about this weekly playlist. How could you organize learning flexibly with weekly deadlines? What will accountability look like for each task and activity that's important? And then thinking about routines from students. And finally, how that'll be assessed. And so as you think about kind of the bigger picture to plug into the into the week, here are some of the routines and activities you might want to consider. So, yes, synchronous learning is great. It's a great time to check in with students. But anytime you are just going to talk at them, you might as well record that, and then they can watch it anytime. And then a kid who misses it because the internet's out, or they've got to watch a sibling, or, their parent needs the computer, isn't feeling all that pressure to be online with everyone all the time. So, asynchronous and synchronous learning are both helpful to have in balance. And when I say that, just so you know, synchronous is all of us together. Asynchronous is here's something for you to do on your own at some point whenever you have the time and ability. Giving students project time, and we'll talk a little bit about 20% projects here in a little bit. Focusing on those foundational concepts, applying learning, doing simulations and online activities. We already talked about portfolio building and skill development. Office hours are really helpful on days that you aren't seeing your students. Having message boards where students can talk back and forth, which sometimes are great in technology, like Flipgrid is a perfect example of kind of a video message board. So you post you post a small, like a question or a short introductory video, and your students create like a mini video in response of it. So Flipgrid is definitely probably my favorite tech integration tool. If you haven't checked out Flipgrid, then take a look. But here are four that I would definitely recommend that you take a look at. We talked about career exploration and career readiness, but also work-based learning. If you have an advisory board, if you have local industry partners who might be interested in being a guest speaker or creating a little video for your students, or being interviewed, those are all things that you could incorporate into the week. And finally, I do want to cover this idea of activities that don't require screen time. Even if your kids all have the best high-tech equipment ever, we know that being on a computer for 6 hours a day, or 8 hours, or 12 hours, or whatever it is, isn't good for any of us. If any of you are totally exhausted by all the Zooms that you're in, think about your students and how they have 6 classes. You're just one of 6, that they have all these expectations. So think about whatever your expectations are of them times 6, and then think about how you can maybe take the pressure off, right? So like earlier I talked about that professional dress challenge, right? That's great. Have your students go through their closet, their parents' closets, come up with a professional outfit and snap a selfie. That gets them kind of like off the screen, engaged in something different. It's very real world. And it's kind of fun. It has like 3 different levels where one that's business casual, one that's business professional. And yes, they might not all have all of those. So be also conscientious of students who don't have access to business professional clothes at home and don't require it. But engaging students in doing some of those activities that don't require a screen is very important. And so, have them interview people that are in their lives. It's a great time to connect with family members and things like that. So have them, do interviews on a phone call with their, aunts and uncles and grandparents, or whoever is in an industry, and think about doing some things that don't require them to be interacting on a screen all the time. All right, so this is kind of like a little routine that I put together because you want to put your own routine together. Also be thoughtful. If every single teacher is asking for all the work to be turned in on a Friday, your students are gonna get overwhelmed. So if you feel like that's it, then consider also switching it up and saying like, all right, everything's gonna be due Tuesday night and we'll launch our week on Wednesdays, right? There's no reason why everything has to be due on Friday. So think about that as well in your students. But let's say the first day of your week, you host a virtual class, you introduce the topic and talk about objectives and what you're gonna expect, answer questions. And then Tuesday, maybe they do something on their own. They're going to do a digital assignment, a Flipgrid like I was talking about, that little video activity. Kids are really into video right now. TikTok is all the rage, and that is a kind of a social media video platform. And so they're creating short videos. So if you can redirect some of that energy into education videos, then you might get additional engagement as well. Give them project work time, host office hours. That could be, anything like that. Maybe on Wednesday, now you have something where students are interacting with each other, whether it's a message board or another tool to have like an interactive collaboration. That might be helpful, but it doesn't need you to be present all the time either. Maybe on Thursday, you give them an online simulation or activity, or opportunity to create a video or infographic. And then on Friday, or whatever the final day of your week is, give them some time to finalize that and give them a deadline. A lot of teachers are noticing deadlines are interesting for students. Students are turning things in at like 3 in the morning. That's okay. If that's when they're doing their best work, let them do their best work at 3 in the morning. Don't schedule your synchronous time, before 11 a.m. or you're going to get less kids who are showing up. Consider your students and their schedule. They're high schoolers. They have this unique opportunity to set their own schedule, which is one of the reasons why asynchronous learning opportunities are some of the best ones for our students right now. Let me go back. The California Department of Education has issued a distance learning template from the CTE team. And so this is actually a recommended resource for you to find options, and oops, let me zoom in a little bit on this. This is the problem when they change their interface a little bit. But what you can see here is you have ideas for both synchronous and asynchronous learning. You have some guides for your teaching strategies. And then down here is just a template where you could plug in weekly assignments. So this is where you could put your little playlist. You know, what are our objectives? What tools, what deliverables are there for them? And then you kind of go through, and here are some routines that you might fit in. There's little bullets under. You don't need to have 5 things or 3 things. These are just kind of places for you to put your information. So feel free to make a copy of this. There's a sample down here, but make a copy of this and use it if you want to issue these along the way. And then Diane mentioned in the chat, HASP has some good healthcare online simulations. I'm super excited that you mentioned HASP. I actually wrote the MedChem curriculum for HASP, so that's an excellent resource if you're on the health side. And let me go ahead and go to our next page here. And these are the curriculum resources that we put together. So we have 2. One is generic career readiness resources, our regular webinars and things that are coming out. So if you scroll through here, you can see also the CTE is issuing a weekly newsletter. I'm a collaborator on that. So we have the last 3 are posted here. SDCOE has begun also a weekly newsletter to issue that in additional regional components. That also goes out on Thursday. So all those archives are here. A number of other resources. We're working on a CTE site for the California Department of Ed too, so that should be coming out hopefully soon. And then here's a whole section on offline resources that could be helpful for those of you who have students who are in rural areas or having a hard time accessing technology. If your district is requiring you to provide packet work for students, then this might be a place to find some of that. And then down here, what you'll find, like here's the webinar I'm doing right now. And then as you go through here, you can find, like last week I did the lesson planning for distance learning and CTE webinar. You can click here to see the webinar, get the slides, and find that weekly planner I was sharing with you. The CDE did a distance learning and CTE webinar, and so that recording is here. And you can go through, and here's our application essential skills, resume skills, and things like that. These are all here as webinars, and we're also moving them into Canvas classes for teachers to take so that you can learn more about how to implement these. Great, yes, I can definitely share these slides again. Let me get this. Sorry, just making sure everybody's in. So here's the slide deck that we're in. And if you are looking to be, sorry, these are a little bit in the way. In this document, that's the distance learning. And as you go through, there's more and more, just, I know, resources. It's a fire hose of information. That's where we're at. That's one of the reasons why the things that we're doing with the CDE, if we come up here, and hopefully if you're not on the email list for the California Department of Education weekly new updates, then you can join that at this link. And if you are in a San Diego County and you want to subscribe, you can also subscribe to our Career Pathways, what we call the Pathway Navigator newsletter as well, or you can just come back to this page and get them. But one nice thing with the statewide newsletter that we're putting together is that there's, in this host of resources that's so overwhelming, what we're doing is we're curating one lesson plan for every sector every week. All right, so the second page of this doc, which is loading, there we go, actually has a separate lesson plan for every sector. And so this is something that you can just go and click and use it depending on the sector you're in, and go from there. So, and someone asked about registering for Canvas. So we're still working on some Canvas courses for essential skills, and they haven't been published yet. So your best bet is actually to register for our newsletter. And that way, as soon as those are available, we can, we'll be posting them there for people. But this distance learning, this is coming out from the California Department of Education. Also, if you have any suggestions, I co-build this every week, and I would love to know what you'd like to see on here, or if you have any favorites that haven't been highlighted that we can put out as well. So this is a great resource for anyone. The other resource that's helpful and grows like crazy is this. These are crowdsourced CTE resources and ideas by sector. Because CTE is so wonderfully unique in the breadth and depth of information our students need, there's no way to self-curate these resources. So this document is actually openly editable by the public, and so you can find that here at the CTE Sectors page, and I'll put that in the chat for those of you who want to come over and see this page. So basically, it has kind of the same opening that I try to update every week with some of these, but then what we see, this is actually 40 pages right now. And I think somebody mentioned health and HASP, so let's go ahead, and if we click on this, that'll take you just straight to that portion. And we've had some sector collaboration meetings that have been great. So sometimes we get ideas out of that. So somebody said they go into their class and they record themselves doing a lab. They give it out to students, including all the data sets, and then students can work through the lab report based on the video they saw of the lab, which we all know doesn't replicate what they would have gotten, but it's better than nothing. And so that's really helpful. But here, as you go through, you can find like Community College Health Workforce Initiative is doing work to support things. We have the HASP, the Health and Science Pipeline Initiative. I don't know why there's a little C there. So there's a ton of resources on that site. And for the most part, everything in this document should be either free or noted if it's not free. And so you can see like here, unsure about costs. One thing that's really cool is I start coming across these things like this rural health info, and there's a whole bunch of like curriculum and resources for rural hospitals who want to build capacity in their own folks who work at that hospital. And so there's like free curriculum resources for people in industry that you can turn around and use for your own students and embed in the distance learning practices. So that's just one sector and an example of what you see. Hospitality, tourism, and recreation. We had a lot more conversation about lesson plans. So you can see a number of lesson plan suggestions here, and then some resources down below. So this is a place to peruse if you are looking for sector specific resources. I know one question people have been asking is around certifications, and I think as we go into next year, that's going to be high on everyone's list of opportunities that students might be able to do. Let's say your school closes down for a month because there's more COVID-19. Maybe that's like, all right, so now we're going to stop what we were doing, and now we will go ahead and turn to do this certification online, right? So that we can kind of be nimble for that. So fantastic. Thank you, Vicki, for sharing. I think that would be great to add CTE specific on SPED and EL. Also keep an eye out. The CDE is doing tons of webinars across all subject areas. So they've had a number that are specific to SPED and EL, just not under the CTE umbrella. But that would be great. I know we've already finished the newsletter that'll go out this Thursday, but I have a little whiteboard on my desk and I'm going to put that on here for next week. And also on those newsletters, there's a feedback forum. So if you come up with something later, feel free to, or you just, you read it and you have an idea, put it in. We look at that every week. We try to respond to people for whom they're asking for something specific. So we are definitely keeping an eye on those things as we go. That lesson planning in CTE, my webinar is posted already, the slides, and again, that distance learning adaptation weekly planner. So if you want to get more in depth on lesson planning for CTE and looking at specific resources and the ins and outs of CTE Online, where they are doing a ton of work, and that's linked everywhere else, but in case you haven't gone to CTE Online recently, when you get in, you get your little dashboard with, your own pictures. This is my dashboard, but there are distance learning resources by sector. So every sector has a selection of resources. There's a group who's looking to update the lesson plans and projects to be more distance learning friendly, but right here you'll see at least curated resources that are more easily adaptable. Additionally, you will find that there is actually a group for each sector. So I've joined all the groups. So if I click on a sector, that's another group where they add announcements and things like that along. So here's some additional information that they post along the way. So this is just another great resource, which is CTE Online. And so I will just add that right here, CTE Online. So that way you can find your way to there more easily. Hopefully you have been to CTE Online. It's all funded by the California Department of Education. And so it's a free, it's a free account. You do need an account to access all the curriculum. It is not for online learning, it's for teachers. It's an online repository of CTE curriculum. So you can go in, grab curriculum, and download it, and then put it in wherever you would like to go. Great. And Diane did just post the webinar link for the CDE. So this is all of the archived webinars. You can also follow them on Facebook. They're live streaming all their webinars. And I'll say, like, I was on the CTE webinar, I was one of the presenters, and they never posted it on here in advance. They only put it on social. So I recommend strongly that you're following the California Department of Education on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and that's where they're actually posting a lot more up-to-date information. It turns out to get things on their website is sometimes complicated. As we all know, the higher up you get in a government infrastructure, the more regulations there are with that. And so I recommend, if you're looking for some of these innovations in special education, there's a ton of special education supports in here. And I know they've been looking at language learners. In general, there's some great stuff also around special education and things if you keep an eye on the COVID-19 site for the CDE. Thank you. All right, the last thing I have here is just thinking about online certifications. I think we're still in the process of evaluating which ones are most valuable online. There are things like someone was saying that American Heart Association was still offering an online CPR certification, but it was not the full cert because you're not doing the hands-on portion, but they were still charging for it, right? So that's probably not something that you want to spend money on if it's not to the level where they could use it to be industry recognized. But there are other companies like Adobe is doing a lot of work to get their certifications so that students can test from home and things like that. Betty mentioned something about hybrid CPR. So you may be able to give students, the one side of it now, and when you're back in the classroom or in a place where you can rotate students through safely, that you do the hands-on portion. I think right now for a lot of our seniors is where we're, how do we get them through as much as we can? And then hopefully next year, basically, if you plan your year and have certain modules that could be done just from home, then save those up until students are working from home, and then anything that they need the classroom for, get those in anytime they're in the classroom. Because like I said, what we're expecting is there are a lot of different models. It could be that students are only on class half of the time so that there's less students, or even 20% of the time, so that this student group only comes on Mondays, and that way your classes that are already very full have room for social distancing, and that the student groups aren't as mixed. And so that is one model that's being looked at, and things like that. And so you want to be really thinking about how your normal learning might be able to fit into new models for learning. And then also, if there's an outbreak of COVID-19, you'll probably close down for a few weeks. And so being able to be nimble and go back and forth means that anytime you can build out most of your class online, then that's going to be really helpful. And I'll say, in August, I'm planning to host some course building kind of collaborative times. And so keep an eye out on our local newsletter to see, when we're getting together to say all right, if you are teaching this class, let's schedule a day where we can virtually work together and take kind of a model curriculum outline and drop in digital resources that meet a lot of the objectives. That way it's more easily translatable. Instead of everyone doing this alone, let's do it together. And then you can just pull what works for your students from that pile of resources. So we will be hosting some of those in August. So I know you should get a nice summer break, but hopefully you keep an eye out on some of that. Yes, if you're outside the county and you want to register for our newsletter, go for it. No problemo. Join in. It's just some of our work-based learning opportunities may not be available to everyone, but the information is usually really for anyone. And if you're teaching the same class and we're doing one of these collaboration sessions to build out classes, come on in. It's as long as you're looking for the same objectives, I think it doesn't really matter where you are. The more collaborators, the better. Thanks, Jenny. As we get into kind of this bigger picture of value, it's not just about activities, but maybe you can just think of having students do a bigger project or spend like half of their time on a project. And in fact, there's something called 20% projects. And so these kind of came out of 3M used to have a 15% project, and then Google had 20% projects. And basically they said to their employees, hey, spend 20% of your time picking a passion project and working towards it. Apparently with Google, that's where Gmail came from, and some other maybe AdWords. So they have found in industry real success when you give people the latitude to come up with their own ideas. You can think about giving students an opportunity. Basically, they propose what the project is, and then your goal is to just check in that they're on task. There are tons of resources already built out. So here's a few here in the slide that you might pull from. And then here at the top, you get this idea, like basically they come up with a implementation plan, and then they get to the point where they're going to pitch it to the class at the end, and then they do a reflection, right? And along the way, they reflect every week so that you can monitor their progress. You don't want to say like, all right, 20% of the time, do this project, and then a month later it's due and they didn't do anything, right? So those weekly check-ins are a really important part of 20% projects, but a lot of these resources are already built out for you at some of the sites below and many more sites as well. I think video projects are also a really great chance. Like I said earlier, students are really into video right now. They are watching TikTok all the time. And so if you can give students options to create their own how-to videos, give them Screencastify or a screencasting program, they can do their presentation ahead of time and then submit it. That's really helpful for kids who are shy. Right now, my face is really big on your screen, and my slides are front and center. And for many people, that's really anxiety inducing. You might be anxious when you're doing this for your students. And so giving students the chance to record their own work also takes some of that pressure off along the way. And so I would definitely recommend considering giving your students that option too. You could also have them do like micro documentaries and things like that, which can be really exciting for students, and another portfolio project. And finally, things like graphic design. I'm obsessed with Canva. I use it all the time for all kinds of projects. It's a free online interface. It has tons of templates to do graphic design work. And so check out Canva. I think PictoChart is another one that has a lot of free options. And this gives them an opportunity to do a visual display of their learning. So they can design marketing campaigns for a small business, their own business, or we've actually seen some sites working with local business owners to help them advertise their new opening hours and things like that. So the students are actually creating marketing materials for social media for local businesses along the way. So that's a really cool thing to give students. Like, again, what is the value, not just for themselves, but they can have value to their community to help small businesses survive through this pandemic. And so they're doing that, and they're also utilizing the email blasts that schools are giving out to help advertise for local businesses as well. And those marketing and business classes and arts, media, entertainment classes are getting almost like a mini internship out of it. You can have them design like diagrams and technical specifications. You can have them communicate data. I know we talked about even having like, all right, students, you're going to make a hand washing guide like you'd see in the restroom. You know, employees must wash hands. Let's take it to another level. What would the sign look like now? And, you know, really thinking about what's 20 seconds and what's happening and why you need to be so thorough in your hand washing, right? And so these are all, they could also kind of build out like a little mini poster around that career spotlight or career pathway plan that they put together. And Vicki mentioned Poster My Wall, which I have not seen. So that sounds like another great resource along the way. I think this is a really good example when people are sharing things, because right now it's, like I said, a fire hose of information. The more that we can hear what worked specifically for you or that your colleagues can hear, it's really meaningful, because now, you know, if these are resources that worked for you that you've put in the chat, that means it worked for you and it might work for me, or it might work for, you know, the next person over. And so be collaborative, reach out to these communities to share your ideas and your thoughts. Feel free on that resource that I had put together that's crowdsourced. Feel free to add things there, or you can email things and I will update them as I can. But ultimately, really think about how you're building a community to support you and your students. You don't have to do this alone. I think the beauty of what we're doing is that we're all virtual now. And so it's not just about you and your site, it's anyone who teaches, and you can all come together. So if you have questions, throw them in the chat. So I have a question. Do you have any advice for CTE support / non-teacher staff? So if you are at the district level or maybe a resource teacher, I think one thing is needs assessment. Talk to your teachers or your the staff that you're working with and find out what they most need, and provide opportunities for them to connect. You can also perhaps curate smaller things. So like right now, you might be listening to this webinar, and then you found maybe the distance learning bingo was something that's helpful. Then you might, instead of sending them a big fat list of resources, because we're all kind of overwhelmed with that, you might every week say like, hey, here's a resource that I found and thought you might find helpful. Please let me know what else I can do. So those are some of the things you can do. And if they're looking for something, you could also say like, hey, if you're looking for a particular lesson, let me know and I can help you search for that. So sometimes it's just being there. I will say, when I've had sector collaboration meetings and I have groups of teachers together, one of the things that has come out is it's not really about instruction practice right now. It's like engaging students. How do you get students there? So you might be able to kind of help come up with themes for teachers and say like at your site or your district, hey, this week in CTE is, you know, collaboration week. And so here's some ways that we can emphasize collaboration. So you could kind of come up with some themes that teachers could use if they'd like to embed in their class. So those might be some suggestions if you're non-teacher staff trying to support CTE programs along the way. Any other questions? All right. Feel free to reach out to me. My email is here. Note my unique spelling of my name. So you're welcome to shoot me an email. Again, the distance learning resources, the CTE distance is really helpful. And then it also links to the resource for sector specific resources. So thank you everyone for joining us today. You are doing amazing work, and so keep it up. Don't burn yourself out. And remember, at the end, it's all about staying healthy, staying well, and learning as much as we can, but don't put too much pressure on. We'll start putting the pressure on in the fall. But right now, let's all get through this. Keep up the good work, and thank you for everything that you do.